Welcome back to the Greenville Chamber's Growing a Greater Greenville podcast. I'm your host, Nelson Weston. Today's episode is one of a 5-part series that will focus on talent and workforce solutions. This series will equip employers with unique solutions and innovative approaches to workforce challenges. Today, we'll be sitting down with Kamber Parker with the organization entitled the YoPro Know. We hope our listeners will leave with key takeaways on how to better tap into diverse workforce pools. But before we begin, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank our presenting sponsor, Blue Cross Blue Shield of South Carolina. And with that, we'll get started. Kamber, thank you for coming on the podcast. We do appreciate it. Tell us all about your organization, the YoPro Know.
Thank you so much, Nelson, for that very wonderful introduction and welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to talk to you today. So my company, the YoPro Know, and thank you for pronouncing that correctly. I know it's kind of confusing when you first see it. It is a consulting business. We help companies recruit and retain young professional talent. So that is between the ages of 21 to 39 years old. We can talk about how that number is actually changing a little bit later. And we help them through research and data that we find on young professionals in the workforce. And we also help them through creating digital strategies because we're young professionals, they're on social media. So how do you expect to recruit and retain them if you're not looking there? So that's a little bit of a high level view of what we do at the YoPro Know.
You mentioned that age spectrum just now. I want to expand upon that. Can you share with us some insight into the diversity of ages in the workplace right about now?
Yeah, so we have about 5 generations in the workplace right now. And if you head over to the website and my website, which we can provide you in the links, I'm sure we actually have that data and information available. But we are looking at the youngest members in the workforce, of course, being Gen Z, all the way up to some of the people in what we call the silent generation. And so those are folks who, they might have experienced parts of the fallout from the Great Depression. So we're looking really far back, and there's very few people that are still in the workforce that are in that demographic. But the baby boomers are right after that silent generation. We've got Gen X below them, and then the millennials, that's my generation. So a little shout out there. And then we've got, not all, but some of Gen Z in the workforce right now. And the reason that I mentioned in our introduction that Gen Z is not completely in the workforce yet, and why that number is changing is because a lot of people we're seeing are not going right to college after high school. They're going straight into the workforce. And so I said 21, but really we're looking at potentially 17, 18-year-olds being young professionals.
You mentioned just now the diversity of ages, and you talked about the silent generation, but we'll come back to that in a second. I want to focus on something else that you said. You said not everybody is going straight into college right this very second. Do you believe that it's going to be an ongoing trend as we progress into the 21st century?
I do. I think that, there's a lot of talk out there right now about how we 30 years ago had so many people encouraging students to go right into college, right? And so we have this huge swing of people that went to college. Now those people are in debt, right? The millennials, we are like the poster child for debt, and we're struggling to purchase homes. And that's a whole other story for another day. But Gen Z is seeing that, right? They're noticing from their millennial peers, we don't want to be in debt. Some of them might have seen their parents go through the recession, and they're like, that's not something that we want. And so in order to get around that, they're going straight to the workforce. And we're starting to see a lot more push because there were so many people that went to get a degree. Our skilled trades are lacking. And so I know that the Chamber is doing a lot of work with their Accelerate programs to really make sure we're focusing on this area. But what I want to encourage listeners to remember is we can't just focus on one side, right? We have to focus on educating people about all of the opportunities in the workforce so that we're not back in this situation 30 years, 40 years down the road.
Let's unpack that a little bit more when it comes to the workforce. For the last couple of years now, and across multiple news platforms, Many people across this country have read headlines about what is known as the Great Resignation. Now, on one hand, what exactly is this phenomenon for those who may be unfamiliar with it? And on the other hand, would you say that we are currently still witnessing and experiencing these impacts?
Yeah, so great question. The Great Resignation, unless you've been hiding under a rock, you've probably heard that term in the last 3 years. You've also heard quiet quitting, there's loud quitting, there's quiet firing, quiet hiring, the list goes on. There are so many different names that have been thrown out here. And here's the thing. The short answer to your question is yes, we're still experiencing this. However, this is totally something that came of the pandemic, right? This is something that we have seen drastically change our workforce, but it's really nothing new. We've seen this just in a different framework in the past, right? There have been times where again, back to this pendulum, the workforce is always shifting. It's going up and down. And we're just in this period of time now where we're seeing a mass exodus from the workforce as a result of the pandemic. And so what I mean by that specifically is there are really an excess of baby boomers and Gen Xers who are leaving the workforce immediately after the pandemic. So there was a time where I think it was 10,000 baby boomers leaving the workforce every month, every week. And I can get back on that exact data, and that was from Forbes. And why that's so important to the work that I'm specifically doing at the YoPro Know is when you have that mass number leaving the workforce, who does that leave? That leaves millennials, that leaves Gen Z to pick up the slack. But what do we know about these two generations? We job hop, right? Everyone always says, and we can talk a little bit about some of the myths versus truths throughout this podcast if you'd like. But young professionals job hop because of a number of reasons, and they're not gaining the leadership capabilities and skills that are needed to take over these positions that are leaving the workforce, right? So we're facing a huge crisis, to be completely honest, in the next 15, 20 years if leaders don't start really focusing on how can they attract and retain the best talent.
Kamber, you mentioned the myths and the truths of job hopping. Let's talk about that. I'm sure there are countless small businessmen and big businessmen and businesswomen on both sides. They are probably fascinated by that term. Let's unpack that a little bit more, shall we?
I would love to. So I think one of my favorite questions to ask people when I talk to business owners, when I speak to businesses, I love asking, tell me what you think about young professionals. And I always preface and say, you're not going to hurt my feelings, whatever you say, like I've heard it before. And most people will tell me, we're lazy, right? And they like to combine millennials and Gen Z, but they are pretty different because again, we had major life events happen at certain, different times. So we are different in the workforce, but you're entitled, lazy, we're the participation trophy generation. We live at home with our parents still, maybe into our 30s. And that's, yeah, maybe you will have some people that maybe fall into those traits, but I guarantee you can find those in other generations as well, right? But at the end of the day, some of the core traits of young professionals that I don't believe are widely shared are we are very hardworking, right? That's not something that people think of, but what creates the opportunities for us to be hardworking? It's giving us ownership. It's giving us growth opportunities in the workforce. It's setting clear expectations. It's communicating with us in a clear and effective way. These are things that companies can do to help really elicit this hardworking and hard ethic that I'm trying to share that young people have. But some other things that are more truths about this generation that I think are probably a little more widely known are we are the generation that really does care about flexibility and this work-life balance buzzword that we always hear, which I don't necessarily agree is possible. I think that you're always in a state of balance and blend, but work-life blend, if you will. But the biggest thing to note here is that I don't ever want people to hear what I'm saying and think, well, she's telling us that we have to do this. We have to meet these young professionals' demands. That's not what I'm saying. I think that you have to understand as business leaders that times have not they're not changing, they've already changed. And so you have to catch up to the technology, catch up to the changes in the workforce that have taken place because of the pandemic. These were always going to happen, but they've just been expedited because of the world and how it's changed in the last 3 years. So I don't know if I totally answered your question, so we can dive back into some of the things that you're interested in talking about more. But how does that sound?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and we'll talk more about the work-life balance a little bit later on in this episode. But I also want to piggyback on something that you mentioned a little while ago. You talked about the act of quiet quitting. What exactly is quiet quitting, and can you share with us how frequently are we seeing that as well?
So, quiet quitting is a term that was actually coined through TikTok last year. And it's something that we're not hearing as much about at this point in time, April of 2023. And that's because there's probably another trend or fad that's coming in the coming year, right? That's just always changing. But quiet quitting was coined on TikTok to show basically young people doing the bare minimum of a job or basically what's in their job description and nothing more because they weren't willing to kill themselves to get that promotion. And in other words, they're just looking for a happy life. And what we're seeing is more and more young people want success, they want to be successful, but some of them are not willing to work 12, 13-hour days to get that. They can see that you can live a happy life and make the same amount of money working out of their home, or they can do it by becoming nano influencers on social media or YouTube. So there's just a lot of changes that have taken place. This is not what our parents did. And so it's unusual, it's new. But newsflash, quiet quitting is not something that is just, singular or siloed for this young generation. It's something that could happen with any generation. And our parents' generations, I'm a millennial. My parents are part of the baby boomer generation. They probably had peers that experienced this too. It just wasn't called quiet quitting.
So to be clear, this is not exclusive to millennials. This is also to Generation Z. This is also to baby boomers and Gen Xers, including the silent generation as well. Is that correct?
It can be, but this was certainly a targeted term towards Gen Z.
Okay. I appreciate the clarity and the insight. So it does make me wonder, though, given your expertise, what can you tell us about the value of employers retaining their existing talent?
There's a lot of reasons why employers can, should and can retain young professional talent. One is a theme that we've been talking about this entire time so far, which is these are the future leaders of our workforce. So it's your legacy. It's your company's legacy. It is developing these young people so that they can go on and not only help our, your individual company, but our entire workforce, our entire society. So that's a pretty big charge. Not to mention within your internal company, the benefits of retaining young professional talent include financial gains, energy, time. There's a Gallup study from a few years ago showed that when you lose a young professional talent, you're losing about 1/3 of their salary if they leave within a year. So that is, depending on what that salary was, that can be a big chunk or a big investment for that company because of the time that you spent hiring, onboarding, and training them. And that's really tough. And the one other point that I'll mention is that a lot of people, when I talk to them at various companies at various sizes, they always say, well, why should I invest in them? Because they're going to leave anyways. And, what happens if you don't invest in them, right? And then they stay? That's going to impact your product, your services negatively. It's going to impact your entire culture. And so it's always better to invest and train long and hard if you need to in order to make them successful.
It's very insightful information. Now, earlier we noted that we're going to come back to the work-life balance. I want to touch on that right now. Let's dive into the mindset differences between some of the aforementioned various generations, which, once again, for our audience, that would include the silent generation, Generation X, Generation Z, boomers, and, like myself and Kamber, millennials. How are each of them viewing the responsibility of their employer keeping them happy at work and also providing a solid work-life balance?
Yeah. So great question. And while millennials were really the first generation to kind of create this approach in the workforce with potentially some tension and some pushback, they finally just realized, I mean, again, they've seen some of the previous generations come through the workforce, and it was, staying at a workplace for 30 plus years. And that changed because, again, young professionals realized they could have a different life where they maybe could make more money somewhere. Maybe they could work hybrid and have that flexibility. And so they were the ones that first kind of pushed that theme in the workforce. And then, of course, Gen Z followed suit. So we know that the young the young professional generations, they obviously really embrace work-life balance. And as much as a lot of people don't love to hear this, they do expect this type of flexibility in the workforce now, because think about the young professionals who, started working right around the pandemic. Some of them have never known a pre-pandemic workplace. And so if you're an employer that we're hearing so much about return to work right now, if you're an employer that is enforcing 100% in office, you're probably going to lose a really good portion of candidates in that top talent pool, because that's just not what they're interested in. Another trait, and something I didn't mention earlier, is Gen Z is the most diverse generation in US history. They are expecting some type of diverse inclusion work at their offices. Now, that can look a lot of different ways depending on the size of a company, but they're looking at, how do you embrace diversity of age? Are you being inclusive of people with disabilities? I mean, it expands beyond skin color. And that's something that they are looking for because, again, they've grown up with this. They were raised in this new kind of concept. So those are just two things about the younger generations. Now, the experienced professionals, that's what I like to call those in Gen X, baby boomer, and the silent generation. It's very different, right? There is, when you go back to myths and truths, a myth and something that I do think is true in some respects of these generations are they are looking down at the work-life balance trend. I think that is true in some regards, but they're looking at it in a way like, well, we had to pay our dues, so why can't young people do the same? And I'll say the same thing that I shared with you earlier. Things are not changing. They have already changed. And so technology is expediting the trends that we're seeing in the workforce more than they ever have before. And we can talk all day about AI because that is going to change the entire framework of our workforce in the next decade. And so that's something that people don't like change, and young people are starting to bring change. And so that's just something that these older and more experienced generations do need to understand. And the last thing I'll say is it's not that experienced professionals don't like this new work-life balance, right? I mean, I think most people will tell you, say they have, kids who are in high school or kids in college or kids that are just entering the workforce. Sure, they might not need that flexibility to run after kids all day, but they might want to take a vacation themselves. They're not missing any of the benefits from this. And so my encouragement to these generations would be what I mentioned earlier about technology, about adapting to change, but embrace it. This is the new workforce, and there are ways to really utilize this yourselves and work together and look at other generations in a positive way so that we can all work better together in the workforce.
Now, Kamber, we kind of touched on this. I want to expand a little bit deeper, though. How exactly can employers, whether they be big business or even small business, and not just here, but all around the country for that matter, how can they better attract and maintain a young professional workforce, especially as we move into the 21st century with the rise in globalization and artificial intelligence and just so much of a technology revolution, or a technological revolution, excuse me?
Yeah. So there are 4 things that I want to share that I think are good takeaways for companies to take with them and hopefully start applying using your HR team, using your marketing team, and I'll tell you why in a second. But the first thing is you need to start listening and understanding your young professionals. So something that I have found over my years of research is that so many companies company leaders will say, well, we keep losing young people because of X, Y, and Z. And I always say, well, have you asked them? And they always pause and they say, well, no, I guess we didn't. So there's a lot of assumptions being made. You would be surprised how much can actually get done if you just ask your young people what they're interested in, what changes they would like to see. And then companies, really take that to heart and see how you can make changes. The second piece of that first bullet point is, understanding them. You have to understand them. You don't have to agree with everything that we believe in and agree with, but you do need to respect that. And the same thing for young professionals. We need to respect the experienced professionals, and we need to understand, why are they the way that they are? What have they experienced in their lifetimes that have made them the way that they are in the workforce? And so until that happens with all generations in the workforce, I don't feel like we're going to really move the needle. Number two is you need to develop these young people, and you can do this through a number of ways. My two favorite examples are, what are you doing for professional development opportunities? The Chamber, this is a great way to plug the Chamber again. They offer many different professional development tools that, in my opinion, are very affordable for companies. And it's a great way to engage your young people, give them ownership, give them opportunities to lead at a young age, and really follow that progress with them. And then also make sure you're training and educating them to set them up for success. The third thing is use social media. We mentioned this earlier. If you're not using social media as a business to attract and retain your talent, you're missing out, because that is where young people spend the most of their time, is on social media. So I'm not talking just about LinkedIn. I'm talking about Instagram. I'm talking about different video tools, YouTube, TikTok. TikTok, we all know, is there's a different story in the news every day. So I'm not openly encouraging everybody to get on TikTok ASAP. But if you have a TikTok already, great place to utilize your communication with young people. And then once you get them in the door, the work doesn't stop there. You can use social media as a way to engage and pull your young professional talent and acknowledge them for, recognizing when they get a certification or celebrating them on a work anniversary. So these are all ways to really retain and engage good talent. And then the last thing I'll say is you have to set clear expectations, really help set the tone, give them clear milestones and a pathway once they get in the door, and then really stay on top of that so that they have a clear vision of where they're going. You will lose people if you don't do these four things.
So, Kamber, let me ask you, in your professional opinion, what does the future look like for the workforce as we move deeper into the 21st century? Do you have high hopes?
So I do, if more people are spreading this message. I tell people all the time, I want more people doing what I do, because we are, and doing the work that the Chamber is doing. I mean, we need as many people on board with this as possible, because, like I mentioned earlier, it feels a little bleak when we are talking about the amount of people leaving the workforce and the amount of young leaders that are left to fill those gaps. I think that AI is certainly an answer if there is, of course, regulation. And I think that we're going to be talking about that for years to come. I think social media continues to be a really big piece of this puzzle, and is something that I want companies to really work with in a strategic way. And so, I am hopeful, because I believe that social media is really powerful, and that's a great way to get this message across. And more opportunities like this to share these words and see how people can really get involved.
It's truly remarkable work. Kamber, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier during the podcast. You talked about hybrid schedules in today's world. As you're well aware, there are many businesses, small and big, that are currently resisting the hybrid schedule. Now that the pandemic is over, or shall we say the darkest days of the pandemic are over, and life has, for the most part, gone back to normal, many employers, many corporate figures are just blatantly refusing to go back to this hybrid schedule. What do you say to business owners who are just against this altogether and they want to make everything back to the way it used to be, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5?
I say that they are probably living under a rock somewhere, because that is not being inclusive of the entire workforce. It's also not being very forward thinking. I've had conversations before with CEOs, and I'm telling them straight to their face, you are going to miss out on some awesome, amazing talent because of that. And primarily I am talking about young professionals because that's my demographic, that's my expertise. But I know a lot of non-young professionals that believe this way too. It's transformed their lives. And I actually saw something. I don't know if you're familiar with the business Elevest. It is a female investment entity. And so they really focus on helping women invest. And it's a national platform. And I saw something the other day about how there was a board meeting that the CEO went to recently, and she talked to the other board members in there that were all men who were really big proponents of going back to the office. And she said, this is good for the men in the room. It's not good for the mothers who have young children, and this hybrid work schedule actually really helps them be more productive in the workforce. So think of not, these people who are CEOs getting people back in the office. Think of who they are, right? I don't want to, point out certain genders or demographics here, but I do believe that we have to think of hybrid work and returning to work as a very inclusive, diverse opportunity. And I don't feel like the companies that are enforcing 100% in office are thinking about that. So you will miss out on really good talent and top talent if you offer this. And then I would encourage people, we actually just did a survey on our LinkedIn poll just about this very topic. The numbers are not surprising. Everybody wants hybrid. Everybody wants that flexibility. And so again, the answers are right there. The numbers are right there. People are interested. So listen.
Kamber, you brought up the word everybody just now. Are you saying everybody as in millennials and Generation Zers, or are you also talking about boomers and Gen Xers and the silent generation too?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying. I should have been more specific. I'm talking about young professionals. That's who we surveyed recently. And so again, that's my expertise. But I think, again, you would not be talking to everybody. A lot of people out there would probably agree with the hybrid workforce, again, because it's just something that people have gotten used to and they've experienced, but I don't have specific numbers on those groups. One other thing that I will mention is I acknowledge that not all businesses can offer hybrid, right? There are a lot of skilled trade professions that just can't offer this. And so what I would say to those companies or those leaders that are asking those questions is, this is a great opportunity to offer flexibility in other areas. So can you allow a couple hours so they can make it to a doctor's appointment? Can you offer a free parking pass if the office, doesn't, or if the workplace doesn't allow for free parking? Can you give them different recognition or celebrations for the work that they've done? You have to think outside of the box, and you have to offer flexibility in different ways that are just outside of that remote work versus hybrid.
So different types of benefits as opposed to the traditional vision, dental, medical, 401k, something that's more 21st century-esque. Is that right?
Yes. And I think that you don't know unless you talk to your people and ask them what they want. But I guarantee you, most people out there, and especially those, no matter what industry, between the ages of 18 to 39, they want flexibility. And so offering those types of benefits are really going to go a long way. So first step is to ask.
And Kamber, as a fellow millennial and as someone who just turned 33, I could not agree more. And I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, as a businesswoman, how can small and big businesses begin working with you today?
First thing, if you are interested at all in seeing, what we could do together and how our business might be able to help you, is we offer a free discovery call. So you can sign up for that on our website, which is www.yoproknow.com. And that's a 30-minute call. We just get to know each other, and I'm happy to give some resources to you there. The second thing is view our research on our site. We have thousands of interviews with young professionals over the years that are open to check out. And in the coming year, we will have more research shared on our website in a more, concrete fashion. Right now, you have to kind of dig through some of our research that we've done in the form of podcasts and blogs, but that is available. And then the last thing I would encourage people to do is subscribe to our newsletter, which comes out once a week. We offer free recruiting and retention tips for businesses.
Okay. And Kamber, can we find you on social media anywhere?
Yes, so I'm very active on all social media channels. LinkedIn is personally my favorite. So you can find me just Kamber Parker, and I would love to connect with you. And I'll throw this out. If anybody listened to this and wants to connect, I'd love you to give a connection request and add a little note saying what you enjoyed about this today.
Well, Kamber, I want to thank you for taking the time to speak with us here today, and of course, for providing such great insight into critical topics.
Thank you so much, Nelson. It was a pleasure talking to you.
It is a pleasure indeed. So, to our listeners, thank you so much for sharing your time with us and supporting our podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, we encourage you to leave us a review, stay tuned for our next episode in the series, and of course, to follow us on each of our Greenville Chamber of Commerce social media pages, and of course, our website.